Hey everybody, Chef Scott here for Devil's Food Kitchen. Welcome to today's recipe. This is a special one because it is, no joke, my all-time favorite sweet treat, the chocolate chip cookie. I love chocolate chip cookies. I'm super amped to just make some and eat some. I don't even care about the recipe. This is just so I can stuff my face with cookies. It's a very simple recipe. It's a very humble recipe. I mean, it's just a cookie. But when you have a really great one, I think it's elevated to something special. So I'm gonna give you my own personal recipe for chocolate chip cookies. It's my version of a perfect one, but of course you can change it to fit your own preferences and needs. If you wanna get started on the method, you can go ahead and jump to that now. I do have some recipe tips and tricks to make your baking experience as enjoyable as possible. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it, making our cookies. I think a good place to start with today's recipe tips is in the chocolate. I mean, this is a chocolate chip cookie. I like using couverture chocolate, that's a high quality chocolate, as opposed to just the grocery store chips. And I prefer something that's considered semi-sweet, so 60 to 66%. I think that slight bitterness and cocoa forward note to that type of chocolate works really well in balance with the pretty sweet dough that a chocolate chip cookie recipe has. Whatever chocolate you do use, I suggest chopping it because that's going to give you little bits and flecks of chocolate throughout the whole dough and with every bite. The specific chocolate I'm using today you can find in the description below. You'll notice I call for bread flour, and that's because I actually want a bit of gluten development because that's going to give us a dense, chewy cookie. If that's not your thing and you prefer more cake-like texture, you can eliminate the bread flour and replace it with pastry flour, or even do a mix of pastry flour and cake flour. I always recommend adding my flavoring, so in this case, salt and vanilla, in the very first step with your butter. A lot of recipes recommend adding that salt or vanilla towards the end of the recipe, but fat is excellent at holding and locking in flavor. So by adding those flavorings at the beginning, you're giving the fat and the butter a chance to do that. Whatever you do, please rest your dough for at least 12 hours. It's going to make a huge difference. For any of you who've seen my top tips video, I recommend resting doughs, and there's a lot of reasons why. It helps flavors to develop. It gives flour time to hydrate because there's a lot of water in your recipe that you want to remain in the dough, but in various functions. So when you rest your dough, you give all of that time to work. I also highly recommend baking your chocolate chip cookies on a standard professional sheet pan. I use half sheet pans at home. It's the same sheet pan that every restaurant or bakery where you've ever purchased an amazing chocolate chip cookie bakes their cookies on. You don't need those big box store miracle cookie sheets. It's not worth the money. I do bake my cookies on a double sheet pan, meaning 2 sheet pans stacked together. That's going to give you some heat insulation for the bottom of the cookie, which can have a tendency to burn before the rest of the cookie's baked, especially in a home oven. Make sure that all of your ingredients are room temp, especially the butter and your eggs, and that you fully emulsify the eggs into the butter and sugar. Emulsification is a really big part of excellent pastry. You want the water of the eggs and the fat of the butter to intersperse and mix as evenly and as finely as possible. That's going to give you a much better bake, a better mouthfeel, better texture, better everything. So don't forget to emulsify, fully mix those eggs in before you move on to the next step. Those are all of the recipe notes I have for today. It's pretty simple, and I think we're ready to make some chocolate chip cookies. We are one step closer to eating them.
Roughly chop the chocolate. You can use a food processor for this step, but I prefer chopping by hand because it's a little more controlled. A rough chop is all you need. Begin the dough by combining the salt, vanilla, butter, and sugar and mixing for 2 to 3 minutes until well incorporated. Add the eggs slowly in a few additions. Be sure to mix well between each addition because full emulsification of the eggs and butter at this step will give you the best cookie. Halfway through the process, give the bowl a good scrape. Combine the baking powder, baking soda, and flours and add them to the butter mixture. No need to sift the flour for this step. Mix the dough until it just begins to come together. There should still be plenty of flour visible. Add the chopped chocolate and mix until the dough is just combined and no unmixed flour remains. This won't take very long. Portion the dough onto a sheet pan lined with parchment paper. I use an ice cream disher to scoop, and a number 30 scoop will give you 3-ounce cookies. Dipping the disher in hot water will make it easier to release the scoops of cookie dough, especially later in the process. Once the dough has been scooped, wrap it up nice and tight with plastic wrap and give it a nice long rest in the fridge. After resting the dough, set up a double sheet pan with a Silpat and begin to stagger the scoops. These are larger cookies, so I don't bake more than 8 to a half sheet pan, and the staggering will allow for good airflow during baking. Slightly press down each scoop of dough before baking. This step isn't necessary if you're using a professional oven, but for baking at home, it really helps the dough spread evenly and efficiently. After removing the cookies from the oven, gently pat them flat with a spatula. This is totally optional and mostly a cosmetic choice, though it does create a slightly denser cookie, which is my personal preference.
Chocolate chip cookies are a success, and I am a very happy chef right now. I'm also a very hungry chef, so these aren't going to last very long. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing. If you are a subscriber, thanks a lot. There's lots more to come, so don't forget to turn on notifications and you'll never miss a new video. And until next time, I'm Chef Scott for Devil's Food Kitchen.